U.S. officials tell Fox News traces of a, quote, mustard agent are believed to be present. If confirmed, this would be the first chemical attack on U.S. forces in Iraq since returning in 2014. No American troops were hurt, we're told. They do have chemical weapons exposure suits there. An initial test on the substance came back positive, we're told, but military officials could not say that could end up being false. Officials also say security posture on that base has not changed yet. Officials say there are hundreds of U.S. troops on that base south of Mosul. There are now nearly 5,000 U.S. troops on the ground in Iraq ahead of efforts to take back ISIS-controlled areas. Another Fox News alert, a busy night ahead. Now to breaking political news. Brand new Fox polls tonight show Donald Trump pulling ahead of Hillary Clinton in 3 battleground states. Trump is leading Clinton by 3 points in Nevada, 5 points in North Carolina, and 5 points in Ohio. We'll get much more from our poll, and we'll go to the campaign trail momentarily, where the presidential candidates weighed in on another police shooting, this time in North Carolina, that led to violence overnight. But we begin tonight with the FBI investigation into the Northeast bombings. The FBI today requesting the public's help to find 2 men caught on camera leaving behind a pressure cooker in New York. This as we learn more about the suspect's condition and his possible motives. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has an exclusive look at pages out of the suspect's journal. But first, senior correspondent Rick Leventhal, who's been following all the latest developments, joins us from Newark with some breaking details on the suspected bomber. Rick?
Right, Brett. A law enforcement source tells me Ahmad Rahami was shot 7 times during his capture on Monday morning and could be in the hospital here for several more days. And as you mentioned, there are 2 other most wanted men in New York tonight. Not suspects, but witnesses. 2 guys who found a duffel bag on West 27th Street Saturday night, took the unexploded pressure cooker bomb out of that bag, possibly disarming it in the process, and then took the bag. The FBI wants to speak to those men because that bag is potential evidence against Rahami, with charges now piling up against him.
Terror suspect Ahmad Rahami remains under guard at University Hospital in Newark, New Jersey, unconscious and unable to speak after multiple surgeries for gunshot wounds, according to law enforcement sources. When he's able, his next stops will be jail cells and courtrooms. In addition to the 5 counts of attempted murder of law enforcement officers and weapons charges from a shootout with police during his capture, he now faces 10 federal counts for the numerous bombs he allegedly planted in New Jersey and New York last weekend.
The first case to proceed will be the federal case brought yesterday in Manhattan Federal Court. We have filed a writ for Rahami with the U.S. Marshal Service, and we expect that he will soon be brought into this district.
This is a copy of Mr. Rahami's journal.
Today in Washington, at a House Homeland Security hearing, Congressman Michael McCaul, the committee chairman, held up a photo of the journal Rahami was carrying when he was caught, splattered with his own blood after he was shot in that gun battle with Linden, New Jersey police. In the journal, Rahami praises terror leaders Anwar al-Awlaki and Osama bin Laden and writes, "Inshallah, God willing, the sounds of the bombs will be heard in the streets. Gunshots to your police, death to your oppression." Authorities say a dozen of Rahami's fingerprints were on the unexploded pressure cooker bomb found on 27th Street, and say he ordered many of the bomb's components on eBay. NYPD Deputy Commissioner John Miller, who testified at the hearing, said the search for more suspects isn't necessarily over.
We're open to any possibility that he acted alone, that there were others involved, that he could have been inspired by a group, enabled by a group, directed by a group, but we're just not there yet.
The response to these misguided acts of terror has been classically American. And what we have come to expect in our city, now thanks to that response, Rahami will face federal terrorism charges in a court of law.
Law enforcement sources tell Fox Rahami's wife is cooperating with the investigation and speaking with the FBI, and agents also want to speak with Rahami, of course. We're told that agents are near his bedside waiting to question him whenever he's physically able, Brett.
Rick Leventhal live in Newark. Rick, thank you. As the FBI waits to question Rahami, we are learning more about the bombing suspect through his personal journal. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has exclusive access to several pages of that journal. Joins us now with a first look at these pages. Good evening, Catherine. You've looked at this. What jumps out at you?
What jumps out at me in the 8 pages that we exclusively obtained here at Fox is that he was a real consumer of the jihadi propaganda. He's totally amped up on this radical message. And this is not something that he picked up recently, but it was on a low boil for some time. He's reading everything. He's reading Al-Qaeda, he's reading the cleric al-Awlaki, and he's also reading ISIS.
So what about that? The discrepancy that he is reading ISIS, he's writing about ISIS, and yet ISIS is not mentioned in the indictment.
Let's go to this one page in particular. It has this specific reference to Adnani. Adnani, as you know, is a major spokesperson for ISIS. He was part of the senior leadership until he was killed in the summer in an airstrike. He writes to him asking, I need sort of reconfirmation or reassurance that killing the infidels is appropriate. Now, what's striking to me is that Adnani is a major ISIS figure, and there was nothing in the indictment about him. So it had the effect of whitewashing his sympathies with ISIS.
You can read it clearly on those pages. What's their reaction to this? How do they answer about the Adnani and the ISIS being left out?
We put the question to the U.S. Attorney and the Department of Justice, and a law enforcement source said, well, you know, the indictment's not the whole thing yet. There's more coming. But I have to tell you, that simply does not pass the smell test, because adding the ISIS reference would have strengthened the indictment. It would have shown his multiple terrorist connections. But by taking it out, it weakened the indictment. But maybe, if I could say, it accomplished a political objective, which was communicating or at least hiding that ISIS had been so involved in inspiring these plots across the country.
It's tough not to get to that conclusion. You look at the backgrounding of reporters by officials originally saying there was no tie.
There's totally a tie in the documents to ISIS. It's there in black and white, along with Al-Qaeda, but for some reason they chose not to include it, and it had the effect of whitewashing this suspect's ISIS sympathies.
Well, we're going to follow it and continue to ask questions. Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Another black man killed by a police officer, this time in North Carolina, leads to violent protests in Charlotte overnight, and has everyone from the presidential candidates to the Obama administration weighing in.
Now, these tragic incidents, particularly coming so close together, have once again left Americans with feelings of sorrow, with feelings of anger, and with feelings of uncertainty. And they've once again highlighted in the most vivid and painful terms the very real divisions that still persist in this nation between law enforcement and communities of color.
While divisions remain, police in Charlotte are adamant that the Tuesday shooting by a black police officer was justified. Correspondent Jonathan Serra has the story from Charlotte tonight.
Police and demonstrators have very different versions of the fatal confrontation that sparked a long night of sometimes violent protests. Police officers say they were serving a warrant at an apartment complex when they noticed a man unrelated to their case, 43-year-old Keith Lamont Scott.
Mr. Scott exited his vehicle armed with a handgun as the officers continued to yell at him to drop it. He stepped out, posing a threat to the officers, and Officer Brentley Vinson subsequently fired his weapon, striking the subject.
The Charlotte police chief said his officers gave Scott multiple clear instructions to drop the weapon, and police investigators say they found a gun at the scene. But some family and friends insist Scott was unarmed and simply reading a book, waiting in his car for his son to come home from school.
We're done letting y'all kill us like we just pawns on y'all chess game. Like we don't have lives out here, like our lives don't matter. Yes, all lives matter, but only black people are being targeted.
But Chief Putney called for calm while taking issue with the version of events that a woman claiming to be Scott's daughter posted on Facebook.
It's time to change the narrative, because I can tell you from the facts that the story is a little bit different as to how it's been portrayed so far, especially through social media.
Protest organizers say the shooting fits a pattern of police targeting African Americans, even though the officer named in the Charlotte shooting is also black.
And it don't matter whether black or white, he was in blue.
Overnight protests started out peacefully, but soon escalated, with some protesters attempting to break into this Walmart, temporarily shutting down Interstate 85 and inflicting injuries on more than a dozen police officers.
We understand that there may be continuing protests this evening. And I want to emphasize that I have spoken with many community and faith leaders already, and we are calling for peace, we are calling for calm, we are calling for dialogue.
And protest organizers are also calling on demonstrators to remain peaceful. They plan to hold a rally in about an hour from now here in Marshall Park, which is near the local police headquarters. Brett?
Jonathan Zeri live in Charlotte. Jonathan, thank you. Just getting word from the White House that President Obama called the mayors of Charlotte and Tulsa today to talk about these incidents. In Tulsa, about 200 people gathered outside the police station in Tulsa, Oklahoma last night to protest the shooting death of Terrence Crutcher. Police dashcam video captured Crutcher with his hands in the air shortly before he was shot by Officer Betty Shelby Friday. Police say investigators found the drug PCP in Crutcher's vehicle, but officers have not said whether Crutcher was using that drug that day. And at the top of the show, we told you with less than 7 weeks to go until the election and just a few days to go before the first debate, new Fox polls show Donald Trump has pulled ahead in 3 of the biggest battleground states this year. In Nevada, Trump now leads Hillary Clinton by 3 points. In North Carolina, a state where both campaigns have spent a lot of time recently, Clinton now trails Trump by 5 points. And in Ohio, the swingiest of swing states usually, where Governor John Kasich has refused to endorse the Republican nominee, Trump is polling at 42% compared to Clinton's 37%. In all of these states, voters polled were pretty evenly split on what party they identify with. This is the party ID question. You may notice a lot of independent voters in all 3 states. Donald Trump now has some polls to obviously brag about on the campaign trail, matching others as he tries to win over more voters. In fact, today, Trump was trying to do just that in the battleground state of Ohio. But as chief political correspondent Carl Cameron reports, the plug wasn't without some awkward moments.
Invigorated by the latest polls, particularly among white and independent voters, Donald Trump began his day with running mate Mike Pence and boxing promoter Don King in Cleveland in a raucous event with African-American inner-city pastors for Trump. Trying to get black faith leaders seated in the front, ardent Trump backer Pastor Darrell Scott raised eyebrows invoking segregationist laws of the pre-civil rights era.
Everyone is welcome, but the pastors and some came from a long way. And I don't want to put them in the Jim Crow section. Separate but equal facilities.
Then Don King drew gasps and mostly laughter when he used the N-word to observe that for some, race defines African Americans more than the content of their character.
You are intelligent, intellectual. You are intellectual Negro. If you are dancing and sliding and gliding, Negro. You are dancing and sliding and gliding, Negro. You know you're going to be a Negro till you die.
Trump expressed concern that the weekend shooting of an unarmed black man in Tulsa appears to have been a tragic mistake, illustrating the need for more police training.
The police are troubled by it, too. They look at it. Now, did she get scared? Was she choking? What happened? We all respect our police greatly, and they will just have to get better and better and better. We're going to rebuild our inner cities because our African-American communities are absolutely in the worst shape that they've ever been in before, ever, ever, ever.
Trump called charges from the left that he is a bigot proof of his popularity in an interview airing tonight on Sean Hannity.
It's a very interesting phenomenon, but the word racist comes out, and that means that you're winning, and that's their last chance. And I don't think it's working.
In a Virginia downpour yesterday, Pence hailed the commitment of Trump supporters.
I'm going to pick up the phone with this soggy arm and call the man and tell him how great you all are.
On international policy, as the UN General Assembly unfolded in New York City over the last few days, Trump seemed to side with Russia by ignoring a formal invitation to meet with Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, who opposes Russia's annexation of Crimea. Clinton did meet with Poroshenko. Trump didn't even RSVP. With 47 days left before the election, the Clinton campaign has outspent Trump by a 5-to-1 margin. And just in the last month of August, Clinton was spending more than $500,000 a day, and still the race is a toss-up. Brett?
Carl Cameron with the Trump campaign. Carl, thank you. An NBC Wall Street Journal poll out has Hillary Clinton leading nationally, but Trump leads Clinton in that poll on being honest and straightforward, 41% to 31%. Hillary Clinton is back out on the campaign trail today after a day off, prepping for the debate, according to aides. The Democrat nominee is in Florida, where recent polls there have her in a virtual tie with Donald Trump. Tonight, correspondent Jennifer Griffin reports on the candidate's attempt to gain ground in the Sunshine State.
We do know that we have 2 more names to add to a list of African Americans killed by police officers in these encounters. It's unbearable, and it needs to become intolerable.
She had hoped to speak about her goal of an inclusive economy, and in a clear appeal to mothers, she is proposing a jobs program called Autism Works. The Clinton campaign sees Florida with its 29 electoral votes as the surest way to inoculate itself from a Trump victory, in case certain smaller swing states don't vote her way. A Real Clear Politics average in Florida shows the candidates tied. Clinton has 57 campaign offices on the ground in Florida and spent $50 million in campaign funds last month with little to show in terms of voter enthusiasm. Clinton is taking 2 more days off the campaign trail later in the week for debate preparations. Campaign spokesman Jen Palmieri says Clinton routinely receives harder questions from debate moderators than Donald Trump.
Sometimes they are not, the questions she gets aren't difficult, but they are particularly aggressive, and I think that's meant to make up for questions that he can get that can be perceived as difficult for him to answer.
Clinton's absence this week has put more pressure on surrogates to step forward and explain her positions. Campaign manager Robbie Mook was pressed by the hosts of Morning Joe.
Was she disappointed that the president didn't act when the line was crossed?
I think you'd have to ask her about that question. We love you, buddy, but what are you here for if you can't answer basic questions?
A new USA Today analysis of super PAC money found, based on campaign finance reports, that super PAC money has passed the $1 billion mark for this race, and that most of that money, more than half of that money, came from 62 individuals, Brett. This is a lot more super PAC money than in the 2012 race. Brett?
Staggering number. Jennifer Griffin with the Clinton campaign in Florida. Jennifer, thank you. Up next, the House Speaker calls out the Secretary of State, calling him a shill. We'll explain. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 10 in Phoenix, where Republican Governor of Arizona Doug Ducey joined the mayor of Colorado Springs to rally against legalizing marijuana in his state. Voters will ultimately decide in November whether to legalize it for recreational use in Arizona. Fox 6 in Alabama, where the fuel is expected to start flowing again around a broken pipeline that led to gas shortages in the South. Company officials say they have successfully tested a temporary bypass and plan to restart that line soon. The company said in a statement, even when the line restarts, though, it will take several days for fuel supplies to return to normal in markets served by the pipeline in the South. And this is a live look at Sacramento from our affiliate Fox 40. The big story there tonight, an Associated Press review finds some California lawmakers collected $56,000 in taxpayer-funded living expenses while not on the job. Lawmakers were able to collect the money due to loosely worded rules over their cost of living expenses. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. President Obama prods Israel's prime minister to end occupation of Palestinian territories while also maintaining that the U.S. relationship with Israel remains strong. The president met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York today in what is perhaps a final meeting between the two leaders during the Obama administration. Correspondent Kevin Corke reports from the White House on Israel's response to the president's push for peace.
Cold, distant, even adversarial, marked by differences over the Iran nuclear deal, Israeli settlements, and U.S. policy in the region. But that was a far cry from the scene in New York today, when the two men effusively praised each other in the wake of a massive military aid package between Washington and Jerusalem.
It fortifies the principle that you've enunciated many times,
that Israel should be able to defend itself by itself against any threat.
The deal is for 10 years and $38 billion, $3.8 billion a year, beginning with budget year 2019, compared with $3.1 billion under the deal set to expire in 2018, $33 billion in foreign military aid financing, and $5 billion for missile defense.
We want to make sure that Israel has the full capabilities it needs in order to keep the Israeli people safe.
But the agreement also forces the Israelis to promise to give back any additional money that Congress appropriates. That spurred South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and other lawmakers to introduce legislation that would give Israel another $1.5 billion in direct military aid.
When people say this is the most generous, deal with Israel in decades, all I can say is that Congress was willing to do more.
Brett, you heard about that $1.5 billion in additional aid that lawmakers would like to send Israel. To put that in perspective, that's just 1% of the, say, $150 billion in sanctions relief that the Iranian regime will get as a part of the Iran nuclear deal. A regime, I should point out, that is still calling for the destruction of the Jewish state. Brett?
Kevin Corke live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. House Speaker Paul Ryan is lashing out at Secretary of State John Kerry, saying he's a, quote, shill for Iran. The harsh criticism comes as the lawmakers examine the ramifications of a $1.7 billion payment to the Islamic Republic. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen reports from the State Department tonight.
With the GOP-led Congress holding fresh hearings on the secret cash payments the U.S. made to Iran in January, payments that settled a long-standing court dispute over frozen Iranian funds and were only disclosed in full in the last 2 weeks, the top House Republican used extraordinarily blunt language to accuse the Obama administration of coddling the Islamic regime.
By bend over backwards, I don't just mean all of these concessions, cash infusions, and side deals. I don't just mean sending the Secretary of State out to shill for Iran like he's the president of the Tehran Chamber of Commerce. I don't just mean paying ransom for hostages.
Ryan's comments came after aides to Secretary of State John Kerry admitted last week that the Iran nuclear deal may have emboldened the regime to become more aggressive toward the U.S. and admitted that they couldn't guarantee every dollar used in the payouts to Iran, $1.7 billion in all and all in hard foreign currency, had been kept out of the hands of the terror groups that Iran sponsors.
That kind of money is going to buy a lot of dead Westerners, and I think that we ought to examine why the payment was made in that form.
At the same hearing of a Senate banking subcommittee, a former aide to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice told lawmakers the payments did not amount to ransom and reflected a long-standing bipartisan approach.
Indeed, since 1979, each American president has sought to use economic leverage, both penalties and incentives, as a central component of the strategy for addressing the challenges posed by Iran.
Kerry's top spokesman told Fox News the Iran deal is achieving its intended objective, preventing the regime from attaining a nuclear weapons capability.
We believe that a Middle East, with all the problems that it has, is going to be that much easier to deal with an Iran that cannot get and cannot use nuclear weapons.
Asked about Speaker Ryan's comment about Secretary Kerry shilling for the Iranians, Admiral Kirby told me in an email just minutes ago, "We stand by the strength of the Iran deal, our efforts to bring our citizens home, and the pressure we will continue to apply to state sponsors of terrorism," unquote. Brett.
James, meantime, the 9/11 bill that would enable 9/11 families, victims' families, to sue Saudi Arabia or countries that support terrorism still is on the president's desk. Any update?
Well, he's got until Friday night at midnight to veto it. If he fails to act, the president will then ensure that the measure becomes law. The White House has signaled that the president intends to veto it. He was probably waiting until members of Congress left town, but that seems unlikely. So we expect the veto to go forward sometime by Friday. We also heard from Speaker Ryan about that today, saying he thinks the votes are there for the first override of a veto in Mr. Obama's tenure. Brett.
We'll look into this tomorrow on the show. James, thanks. The IRS commissioner faced the lawmakers today who want him fired. And John Koskinen admitted some of his previous testimony was not accurate. As correspondent Doug McKelway reports tonight, Koskinen's testimony could be the deciding factor over whether to impeach the man over allegations he obstructed congressional investigations of how the IRS treated Tea Party organizations.
The House GOP leadership reluctantly agreed to today's impeachment hearing of IRS Commissioner John Koskinen, knowing that it stands almost no chance of being reported out of committee, of passing in the full House, and even less chance of moving to the Senate for trial. But it put Koskinen on record, and today he admitted the IRS targeted political groups and mostly groups that leaned right.
They were totally improper. Criteria were used to select organizations applying for C4 designation for further review. Those organizations predominantly were conservative organizations.
But was the targeting an act of malice or incompetence? One skeptic noted that Lois Lerner, the IRS's head of exempt organizations during the targeting, openly expressed a political bias in numerous work emails.
I don't know if you've read Lois Lerner's emails or not, but there is a palpable animus, a hostility towards conservatives that comes through in her work emails.
Another skeptic honed in on Koskinen's tenure after congressional committees had placed a do not destroy order on backup tapes that housed Lerner's missing emails.
1 month after your top counselor learns Miss Lerner's hard drive has crashed and they're missing emails, the backup tapes, the secondary source, the primary source is gone. A month later, the backup tapes are destroyed. And we're supposed to believe that's just a coincidence?
Democrats took no part in the Koskinen interrogation. One used the opportunity to take a dig at Donald Trump's son and his recent controversial Skittles tweet.
A lot of people on this side of the aisle, we like that. And every now and then, I'll get a bad Skittle, but I don't ban them all.
Regardless of what the Judiciary Committee decides next, one Tea Party conservative, Tim Huelskamp of Kansas, is still threatening to unilaterally introduce an impeachment resolution in the full House.
It would be an unfortunate precedent to set going forward.
Whatever Koskinen's fate, the targeting of conservatives had a profound effect. One American Enterprise Institute study found it slowed GOP voter outreach enough to cut Mitt Romney's tally in the 2012 election by up to 8.5 million votes, sufficient to keep Barack Obama in the White House for a second term. Brett?
Doug, thank you. On this International Day of Peace, there's word that another airstrike killed civilians in Syria. And Russia says it will send a Navy ship to Syrian shores. But there was a little hope today as the United Nations said humanitarian aid will resume to Syria. Correspondent John Huddy reports on the situation.
Allahu Akbar! It was a scene of carnage, a deadly attack on an aid convoy Monday night in Syria. U.S. officials blame Russia, saying 2 Russian fighter jets were over the convoy just before it was bombed. Russian officials contend a U.S. Predator drone was flying over the area before the attack. The Pentagon says the U.S. did not have any manned or unmanned aircraft in that area. And so it goes, the blame game between superpowers as the Syrian ceasefire unravels yet again, with more reports of airstrikes today killing at least 23 people. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry told the UN Security Council that all warplanes over Syria should be grounded to, quote, prevent Syria from doing what it so often does in the past, to target civilians.
How can people go sit at a table with a regime that bombs hospitals and drops chlorine gas again and again and again and again and again and again?
Adding to the anger, 5 people were killed in an airstrike Tuesday night on a medical triage point outside Aleppo. It's unclear who is responsible.
Those who bombed them were cowards. Accountability for crimes such as these is essential.
In some good news, the UN said humanitarian aid convoys will resume possibly as early as Thursday. But the finger-pointing, insinuations, and lack of accountability may diminish hope for another ceasefire.
Now I am sure, I don't have any proof, but I am sure that these kinds of coincidences require serious analysis and investigation.
While diplomats scramble at the UN to try to save the ceasefire, Russia announced today that it's sending its only aircraft carrier to the coast of Syria, and this may add to the tension and distrust between the U.S. and Russia, countries that were supposed to be working together on the ceasefire, not apart. Brett?
John Huddy in our Middle East newsroom. John, thank you. For the 6th time this year, the Federal Reserve pushed off raising interest rates. The Fed said today the case for raising rates from their historic lows had strengthened, but wanted to see more improvements in the job market. The markets love that news and responded in kind. The Dow gained 163 points today. The S&P 500 rose 23. The Nasdaq climbed 53. The race for the White House just got turned upside down again. The panel weighs in on new Fox polls showing Donald Trump besting Hillary Clinton in 3 key battleground states. 2 new ads, one from Donald Trump, one from Hillary Clinton, as we get new polls. These are in state polls. Take a look at these just out at the top of the hour. This is in Nevada, North Carolina, and Ohio. And there you see Donald Trump with a lead in all 3 of these states. In one of them, it's within the margin of error. The others, he's up. As you take a look at the internals of this poll, a lot of people like to know how this breaks down. This is self-identifying party ID. And you look, the split in Nevada, 40-40. In North Carolina, 40-39. Ohio, 39-41. A lot of people like to know that. Thought we'd put it up on the screen. But here's another interesting thing. Presidential vote preference and the certainty of your vote. Here's the certainty in Nevada, 93% for each. Now let's take a look at North Carolina, and that is 95% for Donald Trump. This is Fox Poll 7, and 90% for Clinton supporters. And then Fox Poll 11, we lost our polls. But Ohio is the certainty of vote preference. It's 89% and 88%. Trust me, they're great numbers. Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio. And Charles Hurt, political columnist for the Washington Times, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Mara, what do you take from these numbers?
Well, what we take from these numbers is that he is moving up in some of these battleground states, kind of echoing what we saw in national numbers. He needs to win every single one of those states that you just polled in, plus Florida, and then one more, if he wants to either win or tie in the Electoral College. So he's getting there, but he's still got a couple more states that he needs. Yeah, he can afford to lose all of those if he doesn't get any additional ones like New Hampshire.
We've said that her path to get to 270 is easier. There are more paths to take. But clearly he's on the move.
Yeah, definitely on the move. And what's especially troubling about this for Hillary Clinton is the fact that she has dumped an enormous amount of money in these places, nationwide, but also in these places in particular, far more than he has in terms of actual, spending on ads. And she's not able to take control of the message. And he still is the master of that. We saw it all through the primary, but he's still the master of taking control of the message, being the showman, maybe doing it in ways that cause some people to cringe, but he's succeeding at doing it every time. And I think that's why we're seeing these polls close.
Jonah, in Nevada, he's up among independents by almost 20 points. Same in North Carolina. Same in Ohio among independents.
Yeah, no, he's had a great 2 weeks, or Hillary's had a terrible 2 weeks. I mean, that's one of the ironies here is he tends not to gain much support, just Hillary loses a lot of support. Hillary's been over 50%, Trump is not. At the same time, if I were on the Trump campaign, I would be very excited about these numbers. One question I have, though, is in the four-way race with Gary Johnson and Jill Stein, that's like 12% of the electorate. Neither of them are going to be in the debates. As we go forward, it does seem like a lot of their votes are coming out, both of their votes are coming out of Hillary's side. If even a quarter of them actually revert back to the anti-Trump vote, that's really bad news for Trump. But at the end of the day, I think the cliche so far has been right, is that it's going to be a contest between Trump's base's enthusiasm versus Hillary's ground game.
Charles.
The reason she hasn't seized the message is because she doesn't have a message. We saw it in that ad. I mean, what was that? I like children and I will fight for children. There has never been a more banal message, quote unquote, in political history. She doesn't have one. She's essentially a continuation of Obama, who was reasonably popular, so I think she has that advantage. The economic numbers were a little bit better when they came out a few days ago. But that's it. And it's the reason why she's dumped all this money, outspend Trump by an unbelievable amount. Did you say a ratio of 5 to 1? Probably 5 to 1. And it leaves no impression. I thought the most impressive of all the numbers was certain of your choice. They're both over 90%. As Yogi once said,
all three of them are impressive. I just want you to know that. The first one was most impressive because you got to see it, but
it's growing in impressiveness. Yogi once said it gets late early here. It's getting late early, especially for her. She's been known for 30 years. He's been ubiquitous on the air for 15 months. People know who they are. I'm not sure what her advertising advantage is going to do at this point. What is there to say? Which means, I think, in the end, that the importance of these debates is going to exceed the importance of any debates in any race that we have ever seen.
In the meantime, Mara, he is out and about in African-American communities. Last night he said this about black communities around the country.
Rebuild our inner cities because our African-American communities are absolutely in the worst shape that they've ever been in before, ever.
Today, he was campaigning and went to a church with Don King, who kind of raised some eyebrows in what he said and the words he chose, and a couple of jokes from the pastor there. What about this outreach, and is it having an effect, do you think?
I thought you were going to play that. We don't see any signs in the polls that it's having an effect among African Americans. Now, oftentimes when Republicans campaign in African American communities, what they're really trying to show is to moderate suburban voters, no, I'm not divisive, I'm not racist, I am inclusive. But the Don King choice was interesting. Don King, don't forget, was barred by the RNC from showing up at the convention because he's a convicted felon. I served time for murder, I think, right? Or manslaughter. And he not only made a gaffe, he used the N-word, but the picture behind him when he was doing that was of Donald Trump laughing and a couple white people laughing in this African-American church. You see one African-American guy with holding up the cell phone, I guess.
But we should point out he campaigned with Hillary Clinton and Senator Reid 2 years ago.
That's right. That's right. But
just to be fair,
that I would have said was a bad choice also. So I would say the outreach effort not showing big results, but Donald Trump must be doing something right because he is coming up in the polls.
Charlie?
But, that's kind of, this is kind of one of the ways that Donald Trump is sort of breaking all the molds in politics, and maybe it's, it causes a lot of people to cringe, but it might not be a terrible thing. Don King was obviously trying to be, he was trying to sort of be dangerous, and he ended
succeeded.
He succeeded, exactly. And then, but, if Kanye West had said that at a rally for Barack Obama, I don't think people would be so upset about it.
I don't know about that. Jonah, stirring up the African-American community, Hillary Clinton's been out on Tom Joyner's radio show. Obviously, we're going to see the president out much more. We're hearing 2 days a week from now until election. Is that going to fire them up? Can he pass the baton to her?
I've been saying this for a long time. Hillary Clinton was always going to have a very difficult time recreating the Obama coalition. First of all, race and gender just play differently for good reasons and for bad. They're just different things in our culture. Hillary Clinton's a known quantity. Barack Obama was this new charismatic guy, much better retail politician. And so what they're going to have to do if they're going to gin up not just the African American vote, but the millennial vote and a lot of those guys, is they have to demonize Donald Trump even more. The problem there is that a lot of that stuff just doesn't seem to work because people have priced it into Trump. Some people just think it's all fun and games. Other people take it seriously. But I don't know that Hillary Clinton's a good messenger for that. Barack Obama might be.
Last word here. North Carolina is unique. Democrats see an opening there. There's the transgender bathroom bill issue. There's a high level of African-American support for Democrats in North Carolina, and now you have this shooting in Charlotte that is obviously causing a lot of controversy down there.
But given the built-in advantages you're mentioning, the fact that she is slipping in behind, I think, is ominous for her, especially after all the money that she has spent on ads. The race issue, the riots, the shootings, I think will play. It's a very delicate issue. It can be played both ways politically in terms of who it helps. Trump, I think, probably gets the advantage. People have a sense. We thought there would be an improvement with the Democrats, with African American in the White House. There hasn't been an expression of disappointment. But nonetheless, you have to be really careful about that because it can go either way. I'm not sure that's going to tilt the vote in North Carolina. I think it is more the debates and just the personal impression that's going to be left. And here Hillary is setting up a dynamic where she keeps demonizing Trump, and he comes out there and he's sort of normal. He wins.
Quickly. Yeah, I just think that you can be misled by the fact that Trump has had a good 10 days. You would still, just all things being equal, rather have Hillary Clinton's numbers right now than Donald Trump's. She still has a better path to the nomination. It's just that he seems to have more momentum than a lot of people expected.
Next up, the House Speaker calling out the Secretary of State.
What does it say when the United States repeatedly bends over backwards to accommodate the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism? I don't just mean all of these concessions, cash infusions, and side deals. I don't just mean sending the Secretary of State out to shill for Iran like he's the president of the Tehran Chamber of Commerce. I don't just mean paying ransom for hostages. We now know the administration misled the public about the details of the arrangement with this Iranian regime.
House Speaker Paul Ryan today calling out the administration, an administration that has had different things to say about the relationship with Iran and this payment.
Iran released 5 Americans who were unjustly detained on Iranian soil, and we resolved a 35-year-old financial claim with the Iranians in a way that saved Americans potentially billions of dollars.
There was no linkage between this settlement and the freeing of these Americans.
This wasn't some nefarious deal. We do not pay ransom. We didn't here, and we won't in the future.
It would have been foolish, imprudent, irresponsible for us not